Welcome back for episode 14 of the Peacemakers podcast. I am your host, Lindsey Hager. And guys, I have some exciting news to share with you all today. My workbook and my group program experience that many of you have been hearing about through my Instagram account is just about to launch, and it's called About Me, Discover and Own Your Story. I created it specifically for those of you that identify as an Enneagram Type 9, or for those of you that are 9-ish, for those of us that are looking for peace in all the ways that we can find it. Basically, if you're someone that's put themselves on the back burner of your lives and you're ready to take further steps in this journey of knowing yourself and growing in confidence in who you were made to be, this is for you. I'm opening this first round up to about 20 to 30 people. You'll get a PDF workbook and an exclusive 4-week group coaching experience with me and others like you. This is for those of you that are ready to invest further in your self-discovery journey. It is a paid experience, so I don't want that to be a surprise to anyone. So I'm going to put a link in the show notes for my email list so that you can get all of the details about the program. Again, it's called About Me, Discover and Own Your Story. So I hope you all are enjoying yourselves out there. I hope you're having a great summer. I am so happy to share this panel with you all today. We recorded this a few weeks back, and the panelists are made up from some beautiful peacemakers from our Facebook group called the Peacemakers Community. Our topic of discussion was childhood patterns and how those patterns continue to show up for us throughout our lives. And if you listen to my last episode with Michael Shahan, this panel pairs really nicely with that discussion that I had with him. Okay, so I'm about to press play on this. A huge thank you to the panelists for sharing their time and their stories with us. On the panel, we have Roderick from Georgia, Anne from Nashville, Helen from the UK, Emily and Stuart are both from Oregon, and Leanna is from Canada. Okay, thanks for listening and enjoy this panel. I just appreciate you all being here today, and we have 6 panelists. Today our topic is childhood patterns and the roles that we played as kids. And then also we're going to talk about the roles that we continue to see as we're older, like as a Type 9. What are some of those things as a child that you've continued to see as you're older, and, learning more about the Enneagram, how that all kind of fits together. We'll start here by just doing a quick introduction. Okay, Rod, we're going to start with you. Introduce yourself, tell us where you live, and maybe just a little bit about yourself.
All right. So my name is Roderick Holloman. I live in College Park, Georgia. I work at a public school, particularly a second chance school. So teenage moms, a lot of different, a very eclectic population of students that normally wouldn't graduate. And a little bit about myself. So I'm the oldest of 4 boys. So it's always lovely to be around the women and get you guys' perspective. I got aunties and stuff, but it's definitely different when you grow up with boys. So a lot of food was ate. A lot of stuff was broken, a lot of smelly socks around the house and stuff like that. But I think me being the oldest gave me a very unique experience, especially being a 9. Is we love to be in the background, but particularly when you're the oldest, you're kind of like the child that they're kind of like trying everything on. So you don't really get that chance to kind of sit in the background. So once I learned about the Enneagram, I kind of learned where that pressure or that kind of tension of, okay, I want to step out and I want to lead by example, but the innermost part of me really wants to just be silent and sit in the background. So that's just a little bit about me.
Okay, we're going to go to Anne next.
I'm Anne, and I'm from Nashville. Started learning about the Enneagram, a couple of years ago, especially got really into it at the beginning of COVID. So I've enjoyed learning kind of about being a 9 and what that means. From a family standpoint, I was the youngest and the only girl. So I have 2 older brothers and then myself. So I found kind of being a 9, you're the baby, but yet you just kind of let things go. So you just kind of went along with everything. There's kind of a huge age gap between me and my brothers. And so I almost an only child at one point in time, but still I just was very easygoing, always in the background, kind of went along with everybody, making the peace with everybody.
Okay, great. Thank you. Helen.
Hello, I'm Helen from the UK, and I work with young adults with learning disabilities. I met the Enneagram how many years ago? 13 years ago, and I found it really, really insightful and really, really helpful. I'm the oldest child of three, so I was very much the one that was expected to take the lead and behave properly and be the example. So yeah, that was quite interesting thing with the 9, because the one was wanting to be a 9 and sort of kind of be a serving person, really, and yet being pulled out constantly to be like a leader. So that tension has gone through my whole life between the inner me that wants to serve and the outer me that's demanded to lead.
Thanks, Helen. Okay, next we have Emily.
Great. I'm Emily Lovell, and I live in Oregon. I'm a financial coach and a life coach, and I discovered the Enneagram maybe 5 or 6 years ago just because I'm fascinated by personality stuff and typology, and I really, really enjoy it. It is so, as someone said, insightful. That's a perfect word for it. I was the second oldest of 6 kids in a blended family. So there was lots of interesting dynamics that I experienced growing up with my older brother and my younger siblings and stuff. And I resonate with a lot of what people said about being the oldest and being a leader, even though it's not innate or natural, but it's something that like develops because of your childhood. So yeah, I'm excited to talk more about all that.
Thank you. Leanna.
Hi, I'm Leanna. I'm from Vancouver, BC in Canada. I'm a pharmacist, work in the community. I guess we have a big pharmacy called the Shoppers Drug Mart, which is kind of like Walgreens or something over there. I discovered the Enneagram about 2 years ago when I turned 40. I was kind of in a really dark place. And a mom from church kind of introduced me to it by reading the book that wrote back to you, I think, Ian Morgan Cron. But yes, as soon as I read about the 9, I knew that was me, and my whole life made so much more sense. And it's been great. I have an 8-year-old boy, and I'm the oldest of 3. I have a younger brother and a baby sister. I'm almost 10 years older than her, so I was kind of her nanny. And also being the eldest, I was, kind of like a lot of people here that were the eldest, had to be in leadership, but really didn't want to be there. So a lot of conflicts that drove my life. And it's only now that I'm starting to engage in healthy conflict, and then kind of this second half of life that I'm going through right now. It's been very interesting, and the Enneagram has helped me be a better parent as well too. So that's been really good.
Thank you. All right. And then we have Stuart.
Yeah. Hi, my name's Stuart Eyre. And like Emily, I also live in Oregon. I live in Central Oregon, a little town called Sisters. And my girlfriend at the time, 3 years ago, she's a sexual 4, introduced me to the Enneagram and really started engaging it. And at the same time started psychotherapy, counseling as well. And so kind of between those 2 modalities, got to find out an awful lot about myself and why I am the way I am and why I act and react the way I do. And yeah.
Great. Thank you, Stuart. So if you listen to episode 13 of the podcast, I had Michael Shahan. He's a marriage and family therapist. And we talked a little bit about childhood patterns. And it's his belief that we're kind of born our Enneagram number, or we are born with these sensitivities that, it didn't matter what family we were born into or necessarily what experiences we had, if they were, somewhat traumatic, or maybe there weren't a whole lot of bumps in the road, but more than likely we would have landed in the 9 space just because of those sensitivities that we were born with. And so then our life starts pushing in on us and affects us each in different ways. But because of our tendency towards pulling ourselves away from the conflict, and we start to play these roles in our families, and then we start to see them as we get older. And so I'm going to ask you 2 questions. So we'll go around and everyone will answer this first one. Let me just read a little excerpt from what I sent you from the Wisdom of the Enneagram. So it says, 9s grew up feeling that having needs, asserting themselves, getting angry, or creating difficulties for their parents was not allowed. As a result, 9 children never learned to assert themselves adequately, or by extension, to actualize themselves independently of their parents and significant others. Young 9s learn to stay in the background where things could not get to them. In adulthood, their psychic space is so crowded with the issues and agendas of the people who they are trying to accommodate that they're often unable to hear the voice of their own needs and desires. And so it is interesting as I listen to each of your stories of your backgrounds, many of you are either the oldest child in your family, or you, like Anne, you said that you were kind of an only because the distance between you and your next sibling was so far and you're the only girl. So you talked about having kind of that role. You just had this sense of responsibility. And I know you said you grew up on a farm, and so that you can talk about how that played into it as well. But I just find that kind of connection interesting. But let's start with Rod. And Rod, maybe give us like a picture of what your childhood looked like. And as you hear this description of the 9 child, where do you see kind of this description fitting for you?
So I think that when you know, all of us kind of know about the Enneagram, and the 9 falls into the body or instinctual part of the different triads. So when I think about my childhood, I realized after I read about the Enneagram 9 that I was taking in so much information through my body, and I did things not with my heart or my head at all, now that I think about it. And I think with me being the oldest, I leaned into my instincts more than anything, and probably made a lot more mistakes than I probably should have, because I never tried to go to my head or to my heart. I tried to lean on my strength. So my childhood looked a lot like me, like I said, going between that tension of trying to step out and lead by example, but people demanded more of me. Like growing up, it's funny that you was talking about that episode. And he said that, you know, we kind of had these sensitivities and we were born with them. And I can remember as young as 2nd, 3rd grade getting like the citizenship award. And now that I think back on it, I don't think that I got the citizenship award because I think we instinctually want to be great citizens, especially 9s. We want to love on people and be all that we can be. But I think it's also this other part of being a 9 that you're trying to self-preserve. So I think that my citizenship came from, all right, if I do all these great things for people, then I never have to get the spotlight on me. And I never have to try to, you know, have these things said or step into these roles. So you know what? I'm gonna help this guy pick up these crayons. I'm gonna help this guy put this stuff back in his cubby. So I've seen that kind of just tail its way all the way through my adulthood and my professional life, where, hey, I'm the first person to come for tasks that people probably don't want to do. I'm going to stay after when it's time to clean up. I'm going to make sure I put up all the chairs. But then I also have seen, where as I've gotten older, I do want to see, I do have a voice. I do want to say something about that, or I do want to step into that role and might lead on that. So that's kind of just like a little bit of my childhood leading up to adulthood.
Mm-hmm. And you said that you're the oldest of 4 boys?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that right?
Yes,
and
ma'am.
How did, talk a little bit more about how that kind of responsible Rod play out with your brothers?
For sure. We know males are dominated by ego, pride, stuff like that. So I tell this to people all the time. I used to pray to God about, why didn't you make me more assertive? You know, I felt like I always had like the things that women were more catered to, like, you know, I cared about emotions and feelings and stuff like that. So honestly, I felt like now looking back, I had emotional intelligence to give my brothers, more so than stepping out and being what America or, you know, what the world sees as that type A dominant guy. I never was that. So being the oldest for me was a little different, because I think my 9ness gave me a different perspective than what most probably older males, or being the oldest male of boys, would probably try to how to handle those relationships with their brothers. I handled it in a different way. I would pull them aside and, hey, calm down, let's breathe. And I remember doing this like early on. And now that I look back on it, I'm like, wow, okay, I had a little emotional intelligence there.
Yeah.
But like I said, I wasn't happy about that. I wouldn't show that like outside of my home that often, knowing that I know how to like, okay, use these different calming techniques with people. I wouldn't show that, because that's not what people said a male should be. So that was kind of my experience being the oldest.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. All right. Anne, we're going to go over to you.
I was the youngest in my family and the only girl, and my oldest brother was 18 years older than me when I was born. So he was actually a freshman in college. So I actually thought of him more as like an uncle. I'm like, who's this kid, person that shows up every few weekends and spends the night? And so then my brother that's closest to me is 8 years older. So there is kind of a wide age gap. And so as growing up, when he was still home, I was just more in the background. I grew up on a farm, so you just kind of did the things that needed to be done. You didn't complain about it. You did it. And then, of course, when he left and went to college, then I became more of an only child because I was at home and my parents were quite a bit older when they had me. So looking back now and learning about the Enneagram and being a 9, I can tell that I was the peacemaker, that I tried to keep everybody going, kind of in the background, oh, what do y'all want to go? Okay, whatever y'all want to do is fine with me. I didn't insert myself. And now fast forward into, adulthood, and now that my dad is still living and my youngest brother is still living, I find myself being a peacemaker really between those two because they just butt heads, I feel like, constantly. And so I feel like I'm constantly having to go, okay, listen, don't deal with this. I'll take care of this. Let me deal with it. Being the helper, constantly, trying to do what needs to be done and but yet never asserting like, okay, this is what it has to happen or anything. So, I feel like even now, it's always being that peacemaker, always, putting everyone else first, or not using my voice or asserting myself into it.
Mm-hmm. Helen, you want to go next?
Yeah, so I was the oldest child. I would say that my upbringing was, because in the UK where I live, it's kind of right down in sort of the country, and I grew up on a farm as well. And I would say that the attitudes of the parents at that time was very Victorian. So it was very women and men. Women had specific jobs and specific voices or lack of voices, like in church, no voice. And, men had their heavy work and the women looked after the home. And that was very, very strong. And so I was born into a role where straight away I had to be the one that took care of my brothers. I had 2 brothers. One, there was a big gap, 9-year gap between me and the youngest, and only 2.5 with the next one. And so I became like the mini mom. And it was a strange situation, really, because I didn't feel. Well, I felt this tension, actually. I felt this tension between, women aren't supposed to have a role, women aren't supposed to speak. And yet I was having to sort of, lead. It didn't feel the same as being a mum. It felt a little bit different. And so I remember once my brother just under me, he was messing around down by a river. We were in the park and my mum worked. And suddenly I saw the shoe floating off down the river. And it was like, oh no, I know that's going to be my fault, and got home. And sure enough, my brother nothing happened for him. But for me, I was in trouble because I should have stopped that shoe from going sailing down the river. So there were many sort of incidences of where I was expected to play this lead role, and the one that knew better and the one that should behave better. And it was at odds somehow with my personality somehow. And I really do think that because of growing us up in this sort of women and men, different roles thing, I've actually felt dogged my whole life, really, feeling like, this is a man's world and women aren't necessarily taken very seriously. An example of that was a couple of years ago, I was broken down on the motorway in my car and I called the AA man, and after 4 hours and freezing, one came. And then they tried to take details from me in order to then get me home. And they just said, sorry, you don't exist. You're not here. You're not on the database. I'm going, but I am. And they wouldn't listen to me. And in the end, I had to phone my stepfather and tell him my details, who phoned them and said the same details. And I existed suddenly. So it was really, really frustrating, that it was another example of, if you've got a male voice, you're heard. And if you've got a female voice, you're not heard. So that is a situation which has dogged me quite a lot. And alongside that is that women have no needs. Women have to put everyone else before themselves. And my mum is still like that, actually. If we're out in the car and it's my right of way in the car, she'll tell me to wait and let the other person first. And I see that in lots of areas of my life where I have to make sure everybody else is okay first, and then I'll see to me, or if there's anything left for me, I'll have it, and if not, I won't. But almost like I can't relax, until I know everybody else is happy and got what they need.
Thank you, Helen. You brought up a few things that makes me think about just the cultural roles that people play. So you talked about women and men and the view of what a woman is supposed to do or the role she's supposed to play. And, there's many different cultural topics we can talk about in that same way. Like, what ethnicity are you? Or a lot of times it comes back down to like, how much money do you have? What's your status in the world or in your community? But as I've learned about the Enneagram too, I think about the other numbers, and sometimes I get a little bit of a chip on my shoulder talking about like 3s and 7s and 8s that have more of this outward energy. And so they may have been experiencing those same messages of, well, you're a woman, so you don't need to speak up as much. But because they were maybe a more outwardly spoken person, and, at least in America, in this culture, if you're driven, if you have some sort of like drive pushing you forward to do something great in your life, then you're going to get attention anyway. So I feel very sad when I think about either introverts or type 9s or people that have that tendency to put themselves in the background. I get very like protective of us and sad, because if we were born with these sensitivities to be a little more tender or put ourselves in the back, then it makes me want to fight for us all the more, and as I hear y'all's stories and as I think about my story, there's something in me, and maybe it's like that 8 energy or whatever, like, come on, like, let's keep striving to put our voice out there, because there's nothing better about a 3 or a 7 or an 8. It's just, they were lucky enough to have that, forward energy, that assertive energy, I guess is what I'm trying to say. All right, let's go to Emily next.
All right. So I grew up in a larger family. My mom had me and my older brother first, and then remarried, and my mom and my stepdad had 4 other kids. So a little bit of a blended family. I wasn't in contact with my biological dad growing up, and so I considered my stepdad my dad, because they got married when I was like 2 years old. But my older brother didn't. And so it was a little bit stressful for me to feel like I had to like balance that, or please one, not the other or something. And then having 4 younger siblings, the youngest ones were born when I was 9, and they were twins. So I kind of stepped into this role of helping my mom with the twins and all the babies. And so there was a lot of caretaking responsibilities, even as like a 9-year-old, which I liked. I loved babies, and I, wanted to be a babysitter and stuff. But my parents were also pastors. So there was a church setting that we were involved in. We were homeschooled, so we were a very tight-knit family. And so the 9 tendencies that I saw pop up were just kind of accommodating any way I could, and I didn't want to make too many waves. I feel like the waves I did make, it wasn't necessarily that I didn't know how to be assertive or confident, because I did feel confident in my family, but it was more about like not being able to be assertive with my emotional needs. So once I hit puberty, I was just like a leaking faucet, crying all the time and feeling very embarrassed about it, because, it's hard to explain why you're crying when you're 13 years old. And my mom is a 7, so she's very assertive and avoid some of those more negative emotions or things that seem painful. She was both my parents were very nurturing, but they're also pretty assertive, go, very energetic people. So I've learned a lot from them, but I see that in my adult life, I have a smaller social circle than when I was growing up, because it's a little bit easier for me to kind of not isolate necessarily, but to just kind of simplify my life and just like have me, my husband, we just had a daughter a 1.5 years ago. And then like we have, a couple friends here and there. I mean, the pandemic obviously affected that as well, but I found that I still have a role of like trying to balance things out. Like whenever there's conflicts in the family, I want to like hear both sides, and I want to help people find myself doing a lot of mediating because that was what I did as a kid, a lot of like helping out with fights and stuff and trying to get all the kids to get along. And I saw that at church and at school as well, just like, why can't we all just get along type of stuff.
Do you think you did that because you wanted the peace to be there, or did you feel responsible that you were the one that was supposed to bring the peace to them?
It was a little bit of both, but I think it was more that I wanted the peace. I would get annoyed when people would be fighting about something that I didn't think was that important. I'm like, why does that even matter? Can't you just let it go? Because I let a lot of things go. And when I was younger, I didn't really understand why other people couldn't. I would be like, you're making a big deal or making a big fuss about things type of ways of thinking. Yeah.
Very nine-ish sounds.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Emily. All right. Leanna.
Hi. So growing up, I resonated a lot with Helen and Emily. My grandma had 9 kids, so I have lots of cousins. And I was grew up like a latchkey kid. My parents worked 16-hour days, so didn't really see much of them. So I was pretty much like the nanny. I became the parent to my brother, who was only 3 years younger, and then my baby sister, who's 9 years younger than me. But my grandma was the main babysitter, and I guess we lived within blocks of each other. So I would be the one responsible. Anything that went wrong, it was my fault because I'm the eldest. And if I didn't corral all the cousins to behave, then it was my fault. And I wonder if it's a cultural thing as well, too, because I resonated a lot with what Helen was saying, that, all us children were supposed to be seen and not heard. And the women are always in the background, busy picking up things, making everything look perfect and not have any needs or demands. I guess another thing that compounded all the feelings I've got when I was a kid is that I'm first generation born here in Canada. And my parents were from China, and my parents were arranged marriage pretty much. So there wasn't any dating. So I don't know, love is kind of like a weird thing. And also in our culture, in our family, we don't feel feelings. There's no such thing as feelings. Feelings are irrelevant. And stoicism is like praised. You're supposed to be like stoic, like Buddha or something like that. And so any showing of emotion is a sign of weakness. And so if you feel bad about it, you stuff it down inside. You just don't talk about it. So that created a lot of problems. So I learned to just become invisible, kind of like, I do a lot of things to prevent any conflicts from happening because it all comes back to me. I would be in trouble. And also I wanted the peace. So it was kind of a double whammy in that sense. And yeah, so it continued into my life. I became kind of more of like a workaholic, always working extra, coming in early, staying late, doing everything to make sure everything goes well for the team. I don't leave anything behind. And yeah, it's pretty dysfunctional in that sense where I didn't even know who I was. I knew what everybody else wanted. I have no idea what I wanted. So I became a pharmacist because my parents wanted me to. And all these things, did whatever everybody else wanted me to. And then midlife, I'm like, oh my gosh, I did everything everybody wanted to, and I'm miserable. What's going on here? And now having the Enneagram as a tool to grow back to me, to the real me, has been very, very good, very therapeutic.
Thank you. All right, Stuart.
Yeah, where to begin? Well, when I found out I was a 9, I absolutely hated it. It's like, no, anything but a 9. I come from a blended family as well. My older brother and sister are about 6 years ahead of me. And I think my sister's a 3. My older brother is probably 7 with an 8 wing or an 8 with a 7 wing. And I learned early on kind of that my voice didn't matter because my mom and dad would argue, and they would not argue a lot, but when they did argue, it was pretty loud. And my brother and I my younger brother, who's also a 9, would protest them, arguing. And, I'd be standing there crying and asking them, stop, you guys got to stop. I was about 4 or 5 years old at the time. And they wouldn't. My voice was ignored, just go away, go upstairs, go to your bedroom. And they would finish that off, and I'd never get any closure after these arguments. And so that was kind of where I learned my voice really doesn't matter. So kind of the peacekeeper's way of doing things, of just being, kind of in the background. So then when I got into therapy, about the same time I started really diving into the Enneagram, my therapist took me through family of origin and, looking through all the traumas. And that's where I went, okay, this all makes sense now. I'm pretty sure my mom was a very unhealthy 9, narcissist, passive aggressive, really learned the whole passive aggressive thing through my mom. So been working on that, trying to shake that out. But yeah, that's kind of my story.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Stuart. Okay. So for this next question, what I really want our listeners to take from this is, it's really, for me, it's all about like that continual acknowledgement of self-awareness, that our presence matters, that yes, we may have had these childhood patterns and these stories that are super important and super vital to growing and creating new patterns for ourselves. But I'd like you to talk about, what does it look like? And some of y'all touched on a little bit with your adulthood now. So as an adult now, what are some things, or what has been pushing up against you in your life that you're like, oh, that's my 9ness. That is loud and clear, and I got to do something about it. Like, have there been like specific events that you would want to share, or circumstances, or maybe just a story? I just think it'll be helpful for people to hear what it looks like for you when these ego patterns push up against you, and maybe some of the steps that you've taken to change that or get better, or, if you've gone to counseling, or just digging in more to the Enneagram, obviously, is one of those things. So we'll start with you, Rod.
So I think we, as 9s, all of us can probably know that feeling of inertia, right? That feeling, man, everything around me is moving, but I'm like here, I'm like solid as a rock, being stubborn. So I think that's probably the one thing, when you say something that's probably stood out in my adulthood that's affected me, that I can really just point at, is the inertia of, okay, I'll do this tomorrow, but then I still haven't done what I was supposed to do 2 weeks ago. So now this stuff is just building up. So the inertia just builds, and it happens in like waves, It's like this thing that just comes in waves and in sequence with other things that's going around you. So one thing I've tried to do is just really key in on the inertia and not just letting things kind of build up, and then like that 9 explosion happens. I don't know if you guys ever had it where somebody's like, oh, you do get angry. Where did that come from? Okay. So like not letting that build up, because like me and Lindsey had a counseling session before, just talking about 9ness, and I told her that like my body can't lie. That's what my body was telling me as I got older, that I can't lie for you anymore. Like I can't sit here and take these punches and take these blows and just let this stuff just sit here and simmer. And then explosion is your body telling you, hey, look, I can't hold this stuff down any longer. So that's what I've been really trying to deal with, the inertia, and really just allowing myself to feel the emotions and let them sit there, and not just try to use something. We watch TV, narcotization, try to use some type of routine to not deal with what I really want to deal with. So yeah, that's kind of been my journey.
Where have you seen that show up the most for you, where it's like really pushed against you the most?
To be honest, to me, I think it's been all areas, man. Like it's been professional life, it's been relationships. I would say relationships. I'll key on relationships. When I was listening to Emily, and she was talking about having that small group of friends. And I think we at 9s does that, because when we have a small group of emotions to deal with, we can manage that better. What we're really trying to do is manage the peace within inside ourselves with those relationships at the same time. And when you got 10, 20 people to do that, it's hard to try to maintain your peace with all the other, mindsets and positions and like everything. So for me, it showed up in relationships the most. And I kind of tried to say over the last couple of years to really allow myself to go deep. Sometimes we can go surface level and be fine with that, because I don't have to deal with the emotions. I can just deal with mine and take a little bit of yours. So I've been trying to go deeper with my relationships, and not just have associates, but really have some close people around me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about that. Helen and I have talked about highly sensitive, is it HSP, highly sensitive people, and just like that empathy. And that totally, I think, is another thing, like Michael Shahan was saying, that we're born with these sensitivities. And when you're in a crowded room and it's like all of these voices, either it's their voices or it's their facial expressions that are coming at you, or just the vibe of the room, and it's like it makes me anxious, or I gotta just go do something else because it's too much at once. Thanks, Rod. We'll go to Anne next.
Two areas, and I'll kind of spearhead off of what Rod said. It's not going from like getting steps B to Z done. It's getting from A to B. And I think that was one of your podcasts. And it's just like, I mean, I can knock out a ton of stuff, but it's just that initial A to B step. And so I see that happen, not as much at work as more in just personal things. It's like, okay, why was that so hard to make that phone call to get that information that now you can complete these other 12 things? And it's just like, why is that hard to do? And then I think the other thing that I show my 9-ness in is just conflict in general. You come home and we have older kids and they're getting into it with each other. They're getting into it with their dad. And it's just like the constant. And I'm like, I just want it to be peaceful. How can you not, why does this matter? Why are you arguing over this? This is not even relevant to anything. Why do we need this? So just that constant battle. And then it's a battle within myself because it's like, y'all are driving me crazy. I need peace and quiet. I need, this is killing me. It's like, why does this matter? What do we need to do to resolve this? And then of course, denying everything that I need, not asserting myself, but like, okay, yeah, we'll have hamburgers tonight. That sounds great. Yeah, it's not what I want for dinner, but if it'll keep the peace or whatever, then, that's what we'll do. Whatever it takes to have that peace. And sometimes you're talking about being in a crowded room and lots of people. And it's like, I'm just going to go out the back door and just kind of take a brief moment of breath and then come back in. It's just like, you can't, it's like it closes in on you. So yes, that's where I see the 9-ness.
Yeah. My daughter, she's almost 8, and I almost hate it when she has a playmate over. She's the only child. When she has a playmate over, I'm like, I know that I'm going to be needed the whole time. And I'm going to be mediating. Like if they get upset after like 30 minutes of hanging out, I'm like, okay, well, you guys can do this, and you can color over here, and Haley, you can go upstairs. And my husband's like, why are you doing this? Like, she needs to learn to work it out. And I'm like, but no, I want her friend to have a good time. Like her friend's here wanting to have a good time, and I want that. And it's just like a sick way of trying to create my own peace, basically.
Yes.
I'm not really doing it for them. I'm doing it for me.
Oh, yes. No, we talk about sometimes when we go on vacation about getting a house and sharing it with another family. And I'm like, absolutely not. I'm like, I love going to the beach, being with them all day, going to dinner, but I've got to have that early morning where I'm by myself and kind of do my routine, or the late at night to do my routine. It's like, I cannot share like a whole week. Now we can do a long weekend, that kind of thing. But just the thought of going and spending a whole week in the same house with another family, I'd just rather not go on vacation. It's like, okay, I'll just stay home. Y'all go have fun. I'll stay home.
Okay, I'm going to mix it up a little bit. Stuart, if it's okay, I'm going to jump down to you to go next.
I think probably one of the big ones for me is conflict avoidance. And I've gotten better at that, but I've kind of have to figure out where do I step in? Is this worth something, engaging in? Or is this something, just kind of let it slide. They just kind of say their opinion and go. So kind of figuring that out. And the thing I'm finding out is when I state my opinion, people are pretty respectful of that. They may not agree, but they're respectful of it. And the other thing that I discovered is in my personality, I felt that I needed to win the argument. If I was going to, get into conflict with somebody, I needed to make sure that I won that. And that just doesn't matter anymore. I don't have to win. I just make myself known and who I am. And so that was a pretty eye-opening one for me, I think, was the conflict avoidance.
That's good. And then, Stuart, you also talked about learning about your family of origin. What was it that was so helpful for you of learning about your family of origin? And do you feel like that was pivotal in, going into your adult life? Well, you were already an adult when you did that work, right?
Yeah, that was just a few years ago. It's been very, very helpful. And, the whole family of origin thing, it finally made sense how I became a 9 and, the things that I brought along with me on that journey into adulthood and the difficulties that arose from from being a 9 and not knowing that I'm a 9. It's been the most eye-opening thing. And in talking to people, they say, yeah, you have changed over the last 3 years. And so that's, I think, just working with the Enneagram and working with the therapy has been very, very helpful in kind of seeing those patterns and stepping into them. Check in. Am I being passive aggressive? Should I just have been more straightforward in my response to that person? Was I just being kind of a butthole and being passive aggressive when I should have just been straight up with that? So getting better at that, that's for sure.
For me, it's the whole thing of merging. That's been the biggest theme through my life. And it's been one of those things where I would say it's my greatest strength, but for myself, it's my greatest weakness. So as a greatest strength, it's meant that I've been a good teacher. So it means that I can really let go of myself, and with my students that come to me, then it's like if I empty myself, then I'm actually aware of them and what they need and what to do. And there are lots of examples through my life where this ability to merge with other people has been a strength in terms of them. Where it's been a pain for me is, well, Lindsey, we've talked about this from time to time, where I feel as if I'm actually invisible and I struggle to get visible. So unless I'm doing my thing, people could actually kind of forget about me altogether. And so that's something that's painful. But if I took the two things together, I wouldn't change it for the world, because I have been able to use it to be of service, which is what I believe that I come here for. So the fact that it hurts me at times, I still wouldn't change it, So yeah, merging.
Thanks, Helen. Okay, Emily.
So I found in my adulthood, I've been mostly okay with like my career choices and things like that, although I have trouble finishing things. But it's been more about like my emotional state that has been, I've seen a lot of 9 patterns of not really knowing how to deal with powerful emotions or how to accept them or what even to do with them. I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease in my early 20s. And so that was really stressful for me because I was in a state of having to ask for a lot of support. And I did not like that. It was really uncomfortable for me to be like, I need help. I need to see the doctor multiple times, to figure things out. And, it's still around, and that's hard too, is navigating that, of the feelings of disappointment and stuff about my body and its illness, and then also emotional needs and relationships and stuff. And some of the stuff that I have tried to do to help with that is just mindfulness and acceptance of emotions and letting them be. Earlier I mentioned I cried a lot as a teenager, and I think I would cry worse because I would be trying not to cry. And so I would be resisting it so much that the body didn't really know what to do with it. So these days, if I feel like crying, I let myself cry, and then it doesn't really last that long. I can let it pass because it's just a sensation that rises in the body. It's not something that I have to fight like I felt like I used to have to do. And so, yeah, the emotional stuff has come up a lot, and I've pushed up against that a lot. I'm trying to use them and learn from them and not ignore them or neglect them. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. All right, Leanna.
Listening to Emily, I also have an autoimmune disorder. When I was 16, I developed psoriasis all over my body. And then shortly after that, I'm the lucky 30% that gets the arthritis. So I've been living with psoriasis and arthritis for more than half my life. So it's been very interesting. I think the way that the pattern of my 9-ness that's been hitting against me the most is like Emily, the emotions. It was anger and sadness, fear, all those were not okay. We were not allowed to express it. So I stuffed it inside. I fell asleep to it. And then what it did is it came out through my body. We're in the body center. So my body started attacking itself. And I remember somebody said, my therapist probably, anger to self is depression. And I've had depression since probably even before then. I remember being a very depressed 7-year-old. I was one of those weird emo kids that felt like there was something profoundly wrong with me all by myself at recess. And it was really strange. I remember at one point in my life, I was so exhausted with everything around me. I wanted to not exist anymore. bring the 9ers to another level really just not exist. But what I found in my adult life now with therapy and all that, with internal family systems and somatic experience, I'm starting to do some of that right now and dealing with all the trauma I had and embracing the anger, being awake to the anger that I have for all the trauma that I experienced in the past, and being okay with it, feeling all the feelings and kind of let the body just relax. Like, it has been a major thing for me. It was through that I was able to rebuild, reconcile some of my broken relationships. I have let my husband believe that he was the perfect husband for 10 years, and he wasn't, because I was just not telling him what was really going through my mind and what was going on in the relationship. So now that it's only in this last year that I was able to engage in a healthy conflict with him and be honest with him, because like Brene Brown said, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And I was not giving him the chance to be the husband that, he wants to be for me. And so it's been great, this Enneagram journey, knowing myself and knowing that he's a 6. That makes so much more sense now, knowing that, okay, that's I have a lot more compassion for him. Yeah, so it's great.
That is so good. It's so good. I want to say this last thing is that, so this is the 14th episode, and the feedback that I get from others, just when I talk to them one-on-one or when they listen to a podcast episode, or there's a lot of other Enneagram panels out there. Like the Art of Growth has great panels. Like I'm the queen of researching like all of the 9 episodes, like, of all time. Like I will listen to all that. I'm so self-absorbed in that way. But I know how much it means to other 9s and other people out there listening that they might not be a 9, but they have these tendencies. I know how much it means to them to hear your stories. And I think we just have so much beauty to give. I mean, it doesn't matter how old you are, how long you've known this part about yourself through the Enneagram language, or, maybe you feel like you're behind. Maybe you're like, I've lived all this life and I've wasted time. Or, or sometimes I feel like I have tried and tried and tried to get over an issue so many times, and it starts to build up shame because I'm like, how much longer? How, can I not even get the dishes done? I mean, just ridiculous things, small things. But I guess I'm just so encouraged by you guys and thankful that you're recognizing your value, and that you're like, I do matter. And because I matter, I'm going to do the work, even if it's hard. And I'm going to show up and just keep doing it one day after the next. And Rod and I have talked about this. I'm going to tell on you, Rod, and you and I are going to do a solo episode about this, because he has this amazing idea that he has carried with him through his whole life, of something that keeps showing up. It's kind of like a passion in him, and it keeps showing up in different areas of like, oh, this is who Rod is here, and this is who Rod is in this setting. And we're like, yeah, like that's your life passion, is to do that. And however you package it, that's Rod. Like I can look back into my childhood and say, I've always loved listening to people. I've always loved, getting interested in other people's stories. And, Leanna, you said that you kind of went the route of pharmacy because that was kind of an expectation of yours. But now it's like, what's next? Like you have a playground of all these things of discovering yourself, and what could it be that you do next? I mean, not that you're going to let pharmacy go, but there's so many things to discover about yourself and about what you want to do with the next part of your life. So any last words before we leave? I would love it if 1 or 2 people would just give like a sentiment. If you were speaking either to a 9, or if you're speaking to yourself like 10 or 20 years ago, what would you say to them? What would be your best advice?
I'll say something.
Okay. And you go first.
I would tell either my younger self or another 9, you do matter. You do have a voice, and don't overthink it. Just be assertive, get out there and say something and do something. Be loud.
I would say something kind of similar, just like I would tell my younger self not to take herself so seriously because I was quite self-conscious. I still am a little bit, and I would just encourage her to be like, not as many people are watching you as you think they are. you can just be yourself and enjoy yourself, and the people who matter and who know that you matter are gonna see you for who you are.
I would say for me, obviously with 9s, we can be a little bit reticent to engage with our feelings and let our feelings be known in the moment. And that's what I would say to my younger self, is just figure out what you're feeling and then just go ahead and barf it out there. You can't be responsible for how other people are going to feel or how they're going to take it, but to just be yourself. I mean, especially engaging the last woman that I was going with, I would wait till the next day to respond. We'd have this conversation, then I'd play it through my mind, and then the next day respond. And it's like, no, I had all that stuff in my mind yesterday. I should have just thrown it out there and responded rather than, just kind of letting it go by the wayside. I found that to be not a real helpful thing anyway in doing that. So yeah, just
Great.
Let your feelings be known.
Thank you so much. All right, anyone else?
Hey, Lynn, I just want to say, can you get this panel back together?
Aww.
I don't know if everybody would love to come back. If everybody would love to come back, because I did this training. I did this training over the summer for my job, and it was like the first class to go through this training for just to get some more skills or whatever. And it was a very great training. I mean, people were crying, people were, doing all these. I mean, it was like, what? This is a professional training that we're going through right now, and I feel like the same thing. And I don't know if you guys have been paying attention, but the last time a pandemic like this happened, well, if you look through history, the Roaring '20s came after that, and then but I can't remember the one before that. I think the Industrial Revolution. But I was reading some podcast or listening to some podcast, and he was saying that after this particular pandemic, that we're gonna go back to being communal. Like even though we have all this technology, we have all these ways to stay connected to each other, we feel more isolated than we've ever felt before. Because we really, even though people have all this technology and everything, what they do is they put out a figure or image that's really not them. And it's very much getting back to that communal aspect of life. And that's what this feels like on this podcast right now. So just thank you for hosting this. It's been great to get to know all of you guys. So yeah, it's been great.
All right, guys. I appreciate you guys.
Good. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Have a great one.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.